in the chat function. We will answer them at the end of the session. Now it is my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Stéphane Bisson. Steph is a Canadian entrepreneur who has spent the last 3.5 years studying digital assets, investing in digital assets, and eventually co-founded his own digital assets company called EOS Nation. He has a passion for the subject matter and has gladly accepted our invitation to educate us today on the basics of the Bitcoin and blockchain technology. So let's please welcome Steph.
Great. Thank you, Sean. And thank you, everyone, for joining me today. So let's get right into it. Today's presentation is called Hello Bitcoin, an introduction to digital assets, Bitcoin, and blockchain. So my name is Stéphane Bisson. Just quick background on how I got to where I am now. I studied business administration at Ottawa U. I heard of Bitcoin for the first time in early 2009. The price was 2 pennies per Bitcoin. I purchased my first Bitcoin in January 2017. The price was $1,000 per Bitcoin. And in early 2018, I co-founded EOS Nation, which is a company that operates in a different blockchain network called EOS. But today, we're going to be focusing on blockchain, the technology, and Bitcoin. So as we can see here on the scale at the bottom, you are here, you heard about it, and now you're taking some time to learn more about it and to know about it. And then, I'm all the way out here on the scale. I started where you guys were about, 4 years ago, and now I'm fully invested in the space and I'm contributing to it, and I enjoy it a lot. So I was going to show this video about how money evolved over time. However, the sound is not working, so I'm just going to voice over the video. So here it shows how the evolution of money has changed over time. So at first it was shells, then it became copper, silver, and then we put it on a piece of paper. And then those precious metals that were backing that paper was then eventually waved away in 1970s. And now the paper money that we know is only backed by the full faith of the government. So speaking of money, what makes good money and what makes bad money? To answer that question, well, it's going to be very dependent on where you live. Here in Canada, we are very lucky to live in such a country where we trust our money. But that's not the case for everyone in the world, right? Many other countries in the world are experiencing extremely high levels of inflation, corruption, all of that stuff. And so your view of money is highly impacted by where you live. And many people think that our current global money system is flawed. And here are some of the consequences of this system. There's unlimited money printing going on all over the world these days. There's runaway inflation in many parts of the world, and many people fear that it's going to be coming to other parts of the world as well. We live in a period with negative interest rates, which forces savers to take some risks they might not want to take. In many other countries around the world, authoritarianism is on the rise, and this makes it very hard for refugees of these countries, to bring their value when they're trying to escape their situation and find a better life for themselves. And many people still have a lack of access to banking. I think something around the order of 2 billion people do not have access to banking still. And physical cash is disappearing, and that will have some consequences on this whole system. So what's the common thread here? The common thread is that we need to trust others as money in this money system, right? So the need to trust others was even higher when our money went digital. So for example, if I'm at the farmer's market and I'm buying your apples, I give you $20, you give me the apples, we don't need to trust anyone, right? But as when we went digital, we needed, if I'm sending you an e-transfer or I'm paying my credit card, right? There's all these third-party banks that we need to trust in order to do the transfer. So more trust ends up, we end up with less privacy, less freedom, and less fairness, because we're at the mercy of these people that we need, of these institutions that we need to trust, to exchange our money for goods and services. So what are the goals for today? We're going to try to appreciate why Bitcoin is interesting. We're going to learn the basics about how it works. If we have time, we'll do a quick overview of other blockchain use cases. And we're going to have a period for questions and answers. This period is very important. Although the topic is not necessarily extremely complicated, there's a lot of new concepts that we might explore today. And putting all these new concepts together is difficult, and it's going to take you more than just 1 hour of listening to my presentation, right? So we'll go over the information once today. You'll learn some things, other things might not be so clear. Make sure to write those questions down as I'm presenting. We'll go over them at the end of the presentation, or even, I'll give you my email. You can email later, and I'm happy to answer all of your questions. So this is an information session, and I hope you all learned something. So first, let's start with some important definitions. Crypto is derived from the word cryptography. It's now often used to refer to various digital assets like Bitcoin, Ethereum, and others. Cryptography is a method of protecting information and communications through the use of codes so that only those whom the information is intended for can read it and process it, right? So the prefix crypt means hidden or vault, and the suffix graphy means writing, right? So we're writing in a vault, and we're sending that information protected. That's what cryptography is all about, and it's become a full-blown computer science, and we use cryptography in our lives every day. Different words that are used to describe Bitcoin that you may have heard before. Crypto, like I said, cryptocurrency is a very popular one, although I'm not a fan of it because it assumes that all of these assets are meant to be currency, which is not true, right? We've got, so I prefer the word crypto assets, which is more accurate. And now that we're seeing more regulated, large financial institutions entering the space, we've seen that the terminology used now is becoming more digital assets, which I think is a very accurate representation of the space. A few more definitions. A protocol is the accepted or established code of procedure. And a blockchain is a system in which a record of transactions made in Bitcoin or another cryptocurrency are maintained across several computers that are linked in a peer-to-peer network. But there's a lot to unpack in there, and that's what we're going to do today. So Bitcoin is a blockchain protocol, and it's also a blockchain network. So those two can be interchanged. A ledger is a collection of financial accounts of a particular type, and blockchain technology is also referred to as distributed ledger technology, right? So we've got a ledger, we've got a series of balances. A blockchain is the fact that this ledger is copied on all our computers and all the computers around the world, and that's why we call it a distributed ledger. So this is a nice little story I like to tell to introduce the subject. Hopefully it's gonna be even more relevant for this crowd. So blockchain can be considered as a triple entry accounting system, right? So single entry accounting, for example, the king's ledger, he writes down that I own 3 farms, right? And then the next week I come in and see the king and he tells me, no, I now own only 1 farm. And there's no way for me to dispute that because the king is the only person writing in the ledger, and he scratched out 3 farms and he said, I only have 1 now, nothing I can do, right? So then double entry accounting system, the accounting system that's used today, was kind of invented in the 1400s, back in the Italian Renaissance period. Luca Pacioli published in 1494 the first book that described the double entry accounting system. So instead of just 1 ledger, right, we've got credits and debits. This is the system that's included in most of the accounting cycles as we know today. And the blockchain revolution brings triple entry or multiple entry accounting, right? Because even with double entry accounting, it's still possible to fraud the system. It's still possible you just need to make the adjustments on both sides, right? Whereas triple entry accounting or multiple entry accounting is a system where if I modify my own ledger, everyone else in the system will know that this ledger has been modified and is no longer valid. So here's a metaphor that might help explain what a blockchain network is, help you visualize, right? So let's say it's a magic book. All of us, we all have a copy of this book. And if I write in my book, the same writing appears in all the books at the same time, and no one can ever erase anything from this book. And that's kind of how a blockchain network works. Whereas on Bitcoin, for example, we have a copy of the ledger, right, the magic book. Anyone can download a copy of that and can verify for themselves that the information, that their balance, for example, is actually on the blockchain. We'll get more into that in a bit. So what Bitcoin is trying to do at a very high level is innovating at the money layer. In the last 10 to 20 years, we've seen a lot of innovation in fintech, right, financial technology, but most of that innovation has been focused on the payment layer, not necessarily on the money layer. And that's what Bitcoin is going for. So what is Bitcoin? Bitcoin is a new form of peer-to-peer digital money that is self-sovereign, scarce, and open to all. We're going to see what those words actually mean for Bitcoin in just a bit. But the big idea with Bitcoin is that it eliminates the need to trust others, right? So I've got some Bitcoin on my hardware wallet right here, and I can send it to any other address, and I don't need to trust anyone to know that transfer is going to take place. So it's a way to transfer value around the world without having to trust anyone else or without needing the permission of anyone else. How did this even become possible? So here's the quick history of Bitcoin. On October 31st in 2008, Satoshi Nakamoto publishes the Bitcoin white paper. And in this document, it explains for the first time blockchain technology. On January 3rd in 2009, the Bitcoin network went live for the first time, and Satoshi Nakamoto started mining and minting the first Bitcoins. Second user joined a week later. A year later, in 2010, the first known transfer of Bitcoins for products happened, or the most popular one anyways. 2 pizzas were sold for 10,000 Bitcoin, which is a lot of money in today's time. And those were probably the most expensive pizzas ever sold. And then at the end of 2010, Satoshi Nakamoto, the creator of blockchain and Bitcoin, disappears from the internet, and we have not heard from him since. So in the past 10 years, we've seen wild price volatility. You've probably heard of it on the news. Bitcoin goes up a lot, Bitcoin goes down a lot. There's been a lot of scams. There's been also a lot of technology improvements. There was a civil war within Bitcoin at one point where half of the community wanted a certain upgrade and the other half wanted another upgrade. Thankfully, that was resolved, and the piece of the community that wanted a separate upgrade, well, they created their own fork of Bitcoin. There's been 1,000 new cryptos in the last 10 years. I myself work within one of these new cryptos called EOS, and the Bitcoin network has been resilient to attack. In fact, it has never been hacked in the entire history of its existence. And we've got some impressive numbers that might be a bit out of date by today. Daily settled, there's about $2 billion of Bitcoin that's transferred every day. And there's a lot of hash power. We have over 1,000 developers that have contributed to the Bitcoin code over time. And the uptime for the network has been 99.98% over 11 years now. So quickly go over the mystery of Satoshi, right? Who is Satoshi Nakamoto? Is it a person? Is it a group of people? Nobody knows. He's remained anonymous despite the worldwide attention. And this lack of leader is a huge benefit to Bitcoin. Satoshi, according to analysis, Satoshi probably has about 1 million Bitcoins, which is today worth about $11 billion. And the fact is that he's never accessed any of these Bitcoins. So Satoshi is sitting on a fortune of over $10 billion right now, and he has never touched it. And that fact, right, anonymous creator that has personally not profited at all from this network, is very unique to Bitcoin. and it is part of what makes the appeal so high for so many people. Now, let's try to appreciate Bitcoin by looking under the hood. Important definitions before we get into this section. A key pair is known in asymmetric cryptography, also known as public key cryptography, is a process that uses a pair of related keys. You have a public one and a private one to encrypt and decrypt a message and protect it from unauthorized use. A public key, or your public address, right, can be shared publicly and allows users to send Bitcoin to your address. They can also see how many Bitcoins you have on that address. And then the private key is a variable in cryptography that's used with an algorithm to encrypt and decrypt the code. So that private key is held very safely in my Bitcoin wallet. And here at the bottom of the screen, we see an example of what a private key looks like. So what does it mean to have some Bitcoin? So ownership is controlling the private key that allows you and only you to transfer Bitcoin stored on a public address on a shared ledger, on the Bitcoin shared ledger, right? So in this example, we have a private key. Let's say, for example, this private key is stored in our wallet on our cell phone, right? This is the public address that's linked to that public key. And here's the balance. We have 0.28 Bitcoin. So what happens when you send the Bitcoin? First, you need to have some Bitcoin, and you need to have the private key that controls those Bitcoins. In this example, we're sending 3 Bitcoins to this address. So now we need to generate a transaction. A digital signature is created using your private keys that proves ownership of the coin, allowing them to be transferred. So here we have our private key that's stored in our wallet on our phone. And then there's some cryptography magic that happens that we're not going to get into today. And then we produce a digital signature. This digital signature proves to the network that I control the private key without actually revealing what that private key is. And that's what allows me to send a message to the Bitcoin network, send a transaction saying, hey, I want to transfer 3 Bitcoins from here to there. The network verifies that, yeah, that message was signed with the private key controlling those Bitcoins, so the network will allow the transaction. So we need a digital signature. We need the recipient address where we're sending our Bitcoin. We need the amount of Bitcoins that we're sending. And we also need to include a small fee in order to pay the miners to include our transaction in the next block. So once we have our transaction signed, the message is ready to go to the network. So we send our transaction to the peer-to-peer Bitcoin network. And what happens next does not require trust. So we have our transaction here, and we send it to one of the Bitcoin nodes. A Bitcoin node is a computer running open source Bitcoin software. So the difference between open source software and closed source software is that you can verify every line of code in open source software to know exactly what's going on in that software, right? When we use our computers, Windows, Mac, whatever, all of those programs that we use are not open source. They're closed source. We cannot see under the hood of those programs and verify, hey, is Facebook, keeping my data private, or is Facebook sharing it with anyone who wants to pay them? We don't know because the Facebook code is not open source, right? So Bitcoin is open source. Anyone can download the Bitcoin software and run a node on your computer. And people who run nodes on their computer, that means you download the Bitcoin blockchain onto your own computer. So that's shared ledger. Well, running a Bitcoin node means that you have a copy of that shared ledger on your computer. So our transaction here starts, and we send it to a node, and then one node receives it, is like, checks that the signature is valid, sure, and then sends it to another node. So very quickly, we can see that my transaction is sent to one node, sent to more nodes, and more nodes. And very quickly, the transaction is propagated across the entire network. Currently, there's estimated to be more than 50,000 nodes on the network. And these nodes, there's no economic incentive to run a node. You don't get paid to do this, but what you do get in return is you get your own copy of the ledger. So when I send a transaction, or let's say a friend of mine sends me some Bitcoin to my wallet. Well, if I have a copy, if I'm running a Bitcoin node, I can go check directly on my computer, on my copy of the ledger, to see if my transaction has been approved or is actually included in the ledger. So I'm able to verify myself that the transaction is valid and legit, and I don't need to trust anyone else to do so. So that's great, but how does the system maintain integrity? If every node validates their own copy of the ledger, how do nodes agree on a single version of the ledger, right? How do we keep all the ledgers identical? What prevents me from double spending my Bitcoin, right? Because Bitcoin is just computer code, and computer code can be copied, right? So what stops me from sending my one Bitcoin to two places at once and preventing what is called a double spend was the key to unlocking the blockchain potential, and that's the technology part that Satoshi was able to figure out that no one else had figured out before. And finally, what prevents us from modifying the history of the transactions in the network? Mining is the solution to these problems. I'm sure you've heard of Bitcoin mining before. We're going to get into some details here. It might get a bit technical and complicated. You might not understand everything the first time, but you will start to piece together more information. And as always, feel free to write out some questions. I'm happy to answer them. Again, some more definitions. A block. A block is a set of transactions that are added to the public ledger. A block on the Bitcoin network is 1 megabyte in size, right? And can contain hundreds of transactions in it. Miners are special Bitcoin nodes that are able to create a block, right? The other nodes we were talking about earlier, they can copy the information to other nodes. If they receive a new block, they'll copy it to other nodes, but they cannot create a new block. Only miners can do that. A hash function generates a unique fingerprint for any different output. So if we have a string of letters and numbers, we put it through a hashing function, it's going to generate a new string of letters and numbers. And the same input will always give the same output. However, if we change one digit in that, let's say 50-digit string, one digit change will produce a completely different output. That's going to be important in a bit. And proof of work, sometimes known as POW, is a process that makes it expensive to create blocks, but cheap to verify. Also very important. So we've got a new transaction that we just sent, and it arrives in the transaction queue. So it's in the transaction queue. It's been copied to all the nodes, and now it's waiting its turn for the new block to be created so that it's included in the new block. Miners will choose from all these transactions that are available, and they'll choose the ones that have the highest fee, of course. So we'll have a bunch of different miners. There's computers all over the world right now that are trying to find the next Bitcoin block. There's a mathematical puzzle that happens, and all the miners are competing with each other to find the answer to that puzzle first. The puzzle is generated by the Bitcoin network, and the difficulty of the puzzle is adjusted based on how many miners there are trying to solve it. So if we have twice as many miners next week than we had this week, the difficulty of the puzzle will increase by 2x. And in general, it takes about 10 minutes for the miners to find the next block. So we find a new block, miner solves the math problem first, finds a new, and is now allowed to create the next block. He takes the transactions, puts it in the block, and then adds that block to the blockchain. And in order to reward the miner for his work, he earns the transaction fees that I've mentioned from all the transactions, and he also earns new Bitcoin. So in 2009, when the network was created, the first block was mined by Satoshi, and there was 50 new Bitcoins created that were then put in the miner's wallet. 10 minutes later, another block is found, another 50 Bitcoin is created, right? So this is the only way that Bitcoins are created. So miners invest money to buy computers to harvest the Bitcoin. They find the block, they earn new Bitcoin, and then they turn around and then they sell it to other users who want Bitcoin, like me. I want Bitcoin, but I don't mine it. So I go out on the market and I buy it from people there. So now we found our new block, and then this block is added to the previous blocks. And this is what we call a blockchain, right? So it's a bunch of blocks. So since 2009, we had our first block contain some transactions, and then another block, and then another block. And we've always been adding every 10 minutes more blocks to the blockchain. And in these blocks, you can see all of the transactions that have ever occurred on the network. So if you have a public address, you can look, hey, what are all the transactions that ever happened in this address? Oh, he got 1 Bitcoin here, he sent 0.5, he got 2, he sent out 1, et cetera, et cetera. You add up all the transfers, and then you can see the balance in that address. The last thing I'd like to mention here is that in order to mine a new block, you need to include a hash, a link to the previous block. And we'll see why that's important in just a moment. So let's try to abstract a bit what proof of work is in order for you guys to hopefully understand it a bit better. So let's say there's a wall, and the only way through the wall is to jump over it, but it's very, very hard. And you have to try a gazillion random tries to finally get over the wall. If you are able to get over the wall, that proves to everyone that you tried a bunch of times, because it's the only way to get over the wall. So miners are trying to get a block of new transactions over the wall and into the ledger, into the blockchain. And what's very important is that this process is random and fair. Anyone in the world can join the Bitcoin network and become a miner. No one can stop you, and no one can force you either. So it's absolutely permissionless. Anyone can join or leave at any time. So number one, we prove as a miner, we prove that we've done the work by getting the blocks over the wall. And then we add it to the tamper-proof transaction history, also known as the blockchain. And the transactions get added to the ledger. So this is why changing the history of Bitcoin becomes prohibitively expensive. So if you want to make a change to a period, a change to 3 periods ago, that means you need to redo all of that work that's been done, right? So if we want to change the transaction, a transaction in this block, because we're trying to hack the Bitcoin blockchain, well, we also have to change this, the second block, because the hash of this block includes the information of the previous block. So if we change one transaction in this third block, because of the hash that's included from that information in the next block, we're going to be able to see that the hash for the second block is now no good anymore. It's not the correct answer. So we would have to redo the work for the second block and the first one in order to change a transaction in the third one. And so all of the computers around the world right now are mining. There's incredible amounts of energy being used by these computers to try to find this math puzzle. And if we want to change 3 blocks ago, like if we want to change what happened 30 minutes ago when we started this presentation, we would need as much power as all of the miners combined over the last 30 minutes. And right now, Bitcoin is the strongest supercomputer in the world. There's no other network that has as much processing power as Bitcoin does. And that's why that no one has been able to attack Bitcoin so far, because there's just too much hash rate, too much computing power securing the network. So how does it work for real? Let's get into the details of mining a block. So in order to mine a block, you've got three inputs. You've got the previous block, the information from the previous block that's included. We've got the new transactions that we want to include in the block. And then we need to find that random number, the puzzle, right? So we got our information, and now we try a random number. Let's try number 10. We run it through the hashing function, and then it gives us an output. And then the Bitcoin network checks, is this the output we want? No. All right, let's try again. Let's try number 145. Hashing, is this the output? No. Let's try again. Number 1,500,000, blah, 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 right? So that's basically what miners are doing right now. They're trying this number. Is it good? No. They're trying another number. Is it good? No. When you do find the right number, you tell everyone on the network, hey guys, I found the solution to the mining problem. And then the other miners are able to very quickly verify, is that true or not? Because they take that random number and they run their hashing function, and they can quickly see that indeed that guy found the number first and that number is correct. So yes, it is a match. Great. That miner has now the ability to create a new block, right? So he has the right to write, the ability to write in that magic book that we were talking about earlier, right? So you make a new block, you write into the blockchain, and then that new block is propagated across the entire network pretty much instantly. So this sequence that we just described, trying a random number, whatever, is executed 120 quintillion times per second by miners. And that number is actually higher now. I don't even know what that number means. I just know it's incredibly large. So the Bitcoin nodes, once there's a new block that's found, it's their job to validate that that block obeys the Bitcoin protocol, right? It obeys the rules of the network. So are the transactions ordered in by time, right? And there's a few other rules that the nodes check. If the nodes realize that, yes, this new block does obey the Bitcoin protocol rules, then I get the new block on my Bitcoin node. It's downloaded into my blockchain on my computer, and then I send it out to other nodes across the world. And then very quickly, the new block propagates across the network. So game theory suggests that miners are incentivized to start mining the next block as soon as someone else finds a previous one, because there's a reward, right? There's the new Bitcoins that are created, and then there's the fees. So the miners, they want to get those fees and those rewards. So as soon as a block is found, all the miners are going, okay, good job, you found that block. We're going to try to find the next one, because the Bitcoin network produces the next math puzzle right away. And a critical part of this whole process is that the verification of the legitimacy of the blocks is done in a decentralized way, right? Like, I run a Bitcoin node, I'm making sure that miners everywhere are honest. You can run a Bitcoin node and do that as well. And that's part of the decentralization, and that's part of the reason why I don't need to trust anyone that my transaction is going to be included in the blockchain. Because the nodes have their incentives, the miners have their incentives, and those incentives together create the game theory necessary to maintain the blockchain, the Bitcoin network. So like we mentioned before, miners are the ones that settle the transactions onto the blockchain, and the accumulated work is what protects transactions and avoids double spend. So all of that computing power for 10 minutes, all of computers trying that puzzle, it's kind of like embedded in the block. Because to change that block, to change the tag, the hash on top of that block, you need to redo all of that work. And so that's why, so far, the Bitcoin network has never been hacked, because there's just too much work and too much energy embedded in these blocks. So mining maintains system integrity. How do nodes agree on a single version of the ledger? Game theory. What prevents double spending and counterfeit coins? The rules that define what a valid block are. And what prevents modifying history? The cost to redo the proof of work and competing with the honest miners that are continuing to mine and add new blocks to the network. So let's zoom out again. The purpose of mining is to distribute the new Bitcoins in a way that is fair and randomized, right? So anyone in the world can become a miner. Anyone can have a chance at finding Bitcoin. And that's how the new Bitcoins are created, right? And we look at the Bitcoin code and we see, hey, right now, there's only 6.25 Bitcoins created every block. And all of us can verify that information, right? We can't verify, anyways. Okay, so Bitcoin is a new form of peer-to-peer digital money that is self-sovereign. What does that mean? That means that Bitcoin obeys only its own rules. Game theory determines and balances behavior of ecosystem actors. Those actors we can see are out here. We've got the miners that we've talked about. We've got the nodes that we've talked about. We've got the users and their keys that we've talked about. We have businesses that are now building on top of this network because of the trust that they have that the Bitcoin network will not change. And there's also the developers that are building the code. And all of it together creates what we call a social consensus. So there's not a single person or group that can control Bitcoin. Decentralization provides security against corruption or capture. And changes to Bitcoin require massive consensus and backwards compatibility. So to do an upgrade to Bitcoin, you need 80% of the nodes to agree to that network, to agree to that upgrade. Now, if any of you have ever tried to get a large group of diverse people and get 80% of them to agree on something, you'll know that's very, very hard to do. And because of that, we can have faith that no one's just going to come in tomorrow and change Bitcoin, right? 80% of the network needs to agree on this change for it to happen. Bitcoin is scarce. What does that mean? That means due to the Bitcoin code that anyone can verify themselves, we know that only 21 million Bitcoins will ever exist, right? So when Satoshi created Bitcoin in 2009, every new block included 50 new Bitcoins. 4 years later, that reward is chopped in half. So then there was 25 new Bitcoins created every block. 4 years later, 12.5. 4 years later, where we are now, 6.25 Bitcoins. So every 10 minutes, there's 6.25 Bitcoins created. And they're given to the miners who turn around, sell it on the market to get money to pay for their electricity and their profits and their business, etc. If we play out this math of having the supply every 4 years, we'll get to the year 2140 when the 21st million Bitcoin will be issued. And after that, there's no more new Bitcoins being issued. And the security incentive for the miners will have to come from the transaction fees. Fun little stat here. If you own 0.28 Bitcoins, which is about $4,000 today, US, that would be sufficient to be the top 1% of holders in the entire world, because there's just not that many Bitcoins to go around compared to the amount of humans, on this planet. So Bitcoin is also open to all, very important. Permission is not required to participate in Bitcoin. Anyone can receive or send Bitcoin. Anyone can mine Bitcoin. Anyone can verify Bitcoin by running a node. And anyone can improve Bitcoin by being a developer and submitting code. And then if it gets approved by the community, then great, right? No one can block a Bitcoin transaction. If I want to send some Bitcoins to you, no one in the world can stop us. And that's the beauty of not having to trust anyone to transfer value, right? no one can seize or freeze your Bitcoin wealth. The Bitcoins that are on here cannot be taken by anyone in the world. They absolutely need my password. And if I don't give them my password or I lose it, these Bitcoins that are on here will never be accessible to anyone ever again. And that's a very unique property of Bitcoin. And no one is required to guarantee my property rights. It's a self-contained system. And very important, no one can devalue my Bitcoin, right? So I know that if next year there's another pandemic, the network is not just going to create an extra 21 million Bitcoins and distribute them to people. That's impossible. So I know that my one Bitcoin is always going to be one of 21 million, right? So a lot of times people say, oh, Bitcoin is the digital gold, right? So why do people say that Bitcoin is the digital gold? Okay, so let's talk about what makes better money, right? Scarcity is important. There's 21 million Bitcoins in total possible. Right now, there's about 18.4 million that have been distributed. And anyone can sync a Bitcoin node and verify these numbers for themselves. Gold, on the other hand, we have an estimated total supply. We think there's about this much in the ground, still not mined, right? We're not sure. And there's an estimated circling supply. We think there's about this much that's been taken out of the ground and put in jewelry and industrial uses, etc. But again, that supply is unprovable. And then we have the Elon Musk and SpaceX factor, where these guys are trying to go mine gold on some asteroids, and if they're successful, and Elon Musk usually is, they're gonna make it rain gold on Earth from the heavens, and then that's gonna impact the scarcity of gold. Portability: gold is heavy and difficult to move in any serious size, right? Whereas Bitcoin is a fully digital asset and can be moved anywhere globally almost effortlessly. For example, in my business, we have some ambassadors that work for us that are passionate crypto enthusiasts that, like me, enjoy educating people, right? So we have some in Africa. Specifically, there's one in Uganda. Obviously, those people is not very wealthy, and so this guy, he messaged me like, hey, I don't have any money to eat tonight, right? He didn't have enough money to have dinner. So I sent him $40 worth of Bitcoin. And within 15 minutes, this guy was eating in Uganda. He got it 10 minutes later. He was at his local dealer. The local dealer took the Bitcoin, gave him the Ugandan shilling. He turned around and he bought his meal. That's incredible. In 15 minutes, I was able to get value from Montreal to some small city in Uganda, right? There's no other technology that allows me to do that. If I would have tried to use Western Union, it would have cost me like 20-25% in fees. Whereas with Bitcoin, the fee was less than $1. So $1 on $40 is still 2-3%, kind of significant. But point is, this is something that was just not possible before. And kind of ridiculous that in the year 2020, I still can't transfer value to my friend in Uganda in 15 minutes through the banking system. We have to use Bitcoin. Kind of silly. Banks really need to step up their game, and they are, because Bitcoin is bringing competition to the old world financial system that was invented, 70 years ago, and has not evolved since, because there was no competition to that financial system. So there was no incentive for that financial system to improve, right? There is competition now. So what makes better money? Divisibility. Gold is difficult to divide into smaller amounts than you're currently holding, right? I got a gold bar. I want to go buy a meal. What am I going to do? Shave off a sliver of gold? That doesn't work, right? Whereas a single Bitcoin is divisible by 100 million fractional units. And those units are called Satoshis. So one Satoshi is 0.000000001 Bitcoin, right? So I can send less than a penny of value through Bitcoin, but it's going to cost me $1 for the transaction fee. But the point is, as Bitcoin grows in value, let's say Bitcoin is $10,000 today, maybe $100,000 in 5 years, 10 years, well, we'll still be able to send very small pieces of value. gold has physical applications, and many times people who really believe in gold as money will talk about resistance to corrosion, resistance to rust, which, granted, this was probably very important 4,000 years ago when you stored your gold in the ground, right? It's a great conductor of heat and electricity, which generates demand for gold because of the industrial application, right? Bitcoin has none of these elements, nor does the Bitcoin community believe that these properties are important for determining superior money. So what's the end game here? Well, new protocols take time to mature, right? The internet started in 1970. It connected about 10 universities, right? And then in 1995, some of you may remember what the internet looked like. It looked like Netscape, and it wasn't very, very friendly. And now, you know, in 2020, we've got the internet in our hands, streamed directly to our brains at all time, right? So it took 50 years to get from the start of the internet to here. In the last 10 years, Bitcoin has done extremely well, and I can only imagine how easy it's going to be to use in the next, 40 years. So there's a small probability of a massive shift that's going to happen. That shift is going to be the complete reinvention of global finance. Bitcoin as the new store of value, Bitcoin as a global currency and unit account, Bitcoin as a savings-oriented economy versus the consumption-oriented economy that we live in now. And the consumption-oriented economy is incentivized by the fact that governments inflate our money, right? So if there's 2% inflation every year, my $100 bill this year will only get me $98 worth of stuff next year. So I'm incentivized to spend that 100 right away to get max value for it. That's a consumption-oriented economy driven by inflation. Whereas Bitcoin, we know there's not going to be Bitcoin inflation. So I'm incentivized to save my Bitcoin instead of spending it. And these have huge implications for nation states and central banking. So thank you. This concludes the presentation. We've got 10 minutes for some questions and answers. I'm going to go over some comments here and address them. Biggest concern is the security of buying or keeping Bitcoin. How can one make sure they're not robbed in a transaction or suddenly doesn't lose all his Bitcoin assets by a phishing scam? Very good question. I'm not going to go into how to buy Bitcoin, how to store Bitcoin. It is very complicated. But it's not very complicated, but you need to pay attention and you need to take the steps required to protect your crypto assets, right? So a hardware wallet like this is the recommended way to store your Bitcoins. And this hardware wallet cannot be hacked. When I plug it into my computer, the computer cannot come in and hack this wallet, right? So it's very secure. You can also hold your Bitcoin on your phone, on a wallet on your phone. You can hold a wallet on your computer. Now, obviously, your phone is not the most secure device out there. Your phone is designed to share information about you with everyone as much as possible, right? So maybe holding $100 of Bitcoin in your phone is fine. 1,000 might be a bit too much, right? So there's different levels of security depending on how secure you want to secure your Bitcoin. But that's a great question. And phishing scams do happen, and there's no undo button on Bitcoin. There's no 1-800 number you can call and say, hey, someone spent my Bitcoin, it wasn't me, right? If you send your Bitcoins to the wrong address, it's game over. Those Bitcoins are lost forever. So you do need to be very, very careful. Is your private key safe on your smartphone? Yes. I've used Bitcoin on my phone in a variety of different wallets. There's some that are better than others. And I've never had a problem, right? I do try to be careful with my internet browsing and my internet security practices. But definitely a phone is not as safe as a specially designed hardware wallet, right? So, Bitcoin is used for ransom and unauthorized purpose. How can we make sure that there is transparency and control over use? So there definitely is transparency, but there is not control over use, and that's kind of the point. You can't control how I use my Bitcoins. Now, I don't use my Bitcoins for illegal reasons, and it's true that some people do use Bitcoins for illegal reasons. However, it's not the greatest idea for criminals to use Bitcoin because all of the transactions are public, right? And you can't hide your Bitcoins on the Bitcoin network. It's public. So as soon as I transfer Bitcoin to your address, you can see what address they came from, and then you can see, hey, that's Stefan's wallet. How much Bitcoin does he have, and blah blah blah. So 5 years ago, when people didn't understand the technology as much, yeah, black markets were using Bitcoin. These days, there's chain analysis companies and a lot of criminal gangs have been taken down in the last few years because of their use of Bitcoin, because Bitcoin is public and fully traceable. How does one inherit Bitcoin? It's not like cash or bank accounts that can be overridden. What happens when Bitcoin owner dies? The money goes inert. How will Bitcoin adjust as more and more people die and their Bitcoin is now frozen? Excellent question. So if I store my Bitcoins on this wallet, I can write down a series of 24 words, and that's called my seed words, and that's a backup. If I lose my wallet, I can go get my backup words and recreate the keys on a new wallet. If I don't have a backup and I lose my wallet, those Bitcoins are lost forever. So right now, there's 18 million Bitcoins or so that exist. About 4 million of them have been lost forever because when a Bitcoin was only worth a few pennies, people didn't care about them too much, right? They left it on a computer, you forget about it, you've got 100 Bitcoins on your computer, it's worth $2. You're like, whatever, you throw away your computer. 10 years later, when Bitcoin is worth $10,000, you're like, oh my God, where are these Bitcoins, right? So people have been trying to find those old Bitcoins. About 4 million are lost. I have a series of instructions that if I die, people around me will be able to recover my Bitcoins through my will. And there's different people involved, and the password is spread out across in many pieces, in many places, and no one person, right, can combine all of these pieces together without me or without my will. With so much computer involved for mining Bitcoin, does the activity have a negative environmental impact? Great question. Does Bitcoin waste energy, right? That's a very popular topic. And the energy cost of mining is what makes Bitcoin secure against tampering, right? So all of those math puzzles, they require electricity, and that's what secures the network. So does it have a negative environmental impact? I don't think so, of course, because how much energy does the old world financial system use? Probably a lot, right? So this way of using energy to secure the ledger is the only known way to create a high security peer-to-peer digital money. Now, with renewables coming online and with all these new energy innovation going on, Bitcoin is actually a great solution for these renewables. So in the last few months, we've heard of a power plant in New York and a power plant in Iran, both starting to mine Bitcoin. Because what happens is that these power plants are generating X electricity per hour, right? During the day, we're all using that electricity. At night, there's extra electricity generated. And it's costly and inefficient to store that energy and wait for tomorrow, right? What Bitcoin allows you to do, it transfers that energy directly into Bitcoin, which can be sold for money, right? So you can transfer your excess, you can convert your excess energy directly into money. And not just at a power plant, right? Let's say you've got a renewable, let's say you've got an oil well up north, super far, and there's no way to get that energy elsewhere, right? It's too far to send that energy. Well, just mine some Bitcoin from your well, and then you can store that energy in the form of Bitcoin. Or renewables, right? So there's a new mining project in the USA, huge project. They have a deal with I think it's Nevada or Arizona energy grid, where they can use the energy to mine Bitcoin, right? But as soon as the grid demand goes up, right? As people want that energy, the mine stops getting access to energy, and then they give the energy to the people. So when the demand is low on the energy grid, they sell that extra energy to the Bitcoin miners. And then when it's high, they're like, okay, Bitcoin miners, chill for a second. The population needs the energy. And in return, the Bitcoin miners pay a smaller rate on that energy than they would otherwise. And the energy company is in a much better place because it's much more efficient and there's less waste. Hopefully that gives you a better perspective on the energy side of things here. What is the comparison of a Bitcoin to a dollar? Right now, it's about 11,000 US dollars for a Bitcoin. I'm not too sure I understood the question. Are capital gains taxable on BTC in Canada? Yes, they are. I pay a lot of taxes on my Bitcoin gains. It's basically, so because I'm very active and I'm trading a lot, let's say every day I'm trading from one crypto to another, that's considered business activity. So my profits that I cash out of Bitcoin are considered business income, and I need to pay like 50% tax on my profits. If you just buy and hold your Bitcoin and wait a few months, a few years, and then you sell, that's not a business. That's considered capital gains. And so can be treated just like stocks, basically. One last question with the Bitcoin to dollar. We need an 11:30 cutoff. Super well done. Okay, great. So we've got 2 more minutes. I'm gonna share. Okay, yeah. Let's finish with this. Bitcoin is only for criminals, right? So what does the old guard think? What do the people who made their money in the old financial system think about Bitcoin? Jamie Dimon, CEO of JP Morgan, Bitcoin's a fraud. It's worse than tulips. Warren Buffett, Bitcoin is rat poison squared. Paul Krugman, Bitcoin is evil, right? What do the tech leaders think of Bitcoin? Jack Dorsey, CEO of Twitter and Square, Bitcoin is resilient. Bitcoin is principled. Bitcoin is native to internet ideals. Eric Schmidt, former CEO of Google, Bitcoin is a remarkable cryptographic achievement, and the ability to create something that is not duplicable in the digital world has enormous value. And Peter Thiel, co-founder of PayPal and many other successful businesses, I do think Bitcoin is the first encrypted money that has the potential to do something like change the world. So we're going to leave it there. Thank you very much for joining. I'm going to share my email in the chat. It's Stefan at eosnation.io. And I encourage you to email me if you have any questions. I encourage you to email me if you want to know the answers to the questions I'll be sharing. So let's say a few of you email me. I'll make a quick video. I'll answer your questions, and then I'll reshare this video by email to anyone who contacts me.
Okay,
So,
thanks, Steph.
Great.
Thanks, Steph,
Thanks for
very much.
Hopefully you learned something.
For today's session, and I'm sure everybody learned something from you today. And as always, if you have any questions, you can reach our team, or you can just email questions to staff directly, however you want. So we're looking forward to seeing you in the next session. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
All right, thanks, John. Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.